crooked officer tangled with the law enforcement leader's African-American spouse unknowingly. Then the entire precinct was stunned by the outcome. "Papers please." Sergeant Mitchell's command reverberated across the vacant grocery store lot as his fingers lingered suggestively on his firearm. The patrol vehicle's beams brightly lit Vanessa's expression while she steadily gripped the BMW's keys. It was 10:30 p.m. on an ordinary Tuesday when that standard pullover transformed a basic shopping errand into deliberate degradation. Mitchell had intentionally selected a black lady solo in a luxury vehicle in a posh area. The ideal mark for his regular shakedown. "This ride isn't yours, right, sweetheart?" He grinned wickedly, scrutinizing the flawless paperwork. "I wager you can't name who you swiped it from. Let's head to the precinct and sort this out." Vanessa Thompson, 34, a lawyer focused on offenses versus government operations, stayed quiet as Mitchell fabricated imaginary violations. In her 12-year profession, she had convicted scores of dishonest cops, yet she'd never faced such profound shame personally. Or Mitchell edged perilously nearer. "We could resolve this differently. Hand over $500 and we'll overlook this fiasco. Else, it'll be tough justifying to your employer how you pinched his wheels." What Mitchell was unaware of was that those apparently compliant gazes had already committed to memory each aspect of his stance, each menacing phrase, each dishonest action. Vanessa had discovered long ago that genuine power stems not from yelling or immediate clashes, but from the strategic endurance of one who understands precisely when and how to retaliate. As she grudgingly passed the cash to conclude the farce, a quiet inquiry crossed her thoughts. Might Mitchell truly be foolish enough to skip checking his prey's true identity prior to attempting to squeeze her? The response would arrive far quicker than he could foresee. But prior to uncovering what Vanessa had prepared, we must grasp what sort of tempest Mitchell had just stirred by picking the incorrect lady on the incorrect evening. If you're liking this tale of fairness and payback, remember to join the feed since the upcoming parts will demonstrate that interfering with the wrong individual can cost far more than some cash. Mitchell arose the following dawn with a swollen pride and additional $500 in his pocket. The shakedown from the prior night had been so simple that he was already scheming to repeat it. After all, black ladies and pricey autos were ideal prey. They seldom possessed actual attorneys and invariably yielded at the initial hint of intimidation. During morning meal at Diner's Corner, he boasted to fellow cops about how he'd schooled a sassy little queen the evening before. "You ought to have witnessed how docile she became once I clarified how matters function hereabouts." Mitchell chuckled while stirring sweetener into his brew. What Mitchell failed to notice was that 3 booths behind, Vanessa Thompson was internally noting every syllable of that exchange. She'd shown up early deliberately at the identical eatery popular with area lawmen, equipped solely with a novel and a remarkable talent for blending in. As Mitchell persisted in his show for his peers, outlining precisely how he'd concocted flaws in the BMW, Vanessa subtly engaged the audio device on her mobile. Each harsh chortle, each bigoted remark masked as a law enforcement quip, each acknowledgement of wrongdoing was meticulously captured. "The secret is selecting your mark wisely," Mitchell went on, ignorant of the gale forming mere feet distant. "Folks like those lack the guts to complain. They realize nobody will trust them over a cop." The sarcasm was exquisite. Here stood a guy flaunting offenses he'd perpetrated against attorneys without realizing his latest mark had straight entry to the Ethics Bureau, key connections with national magistrates, and above all, a hunger for equity that had been stoked for years by convicting folks exactly like him. Vanessa wasn't merely any lawyer. Expert in offenses against state operations, she'd constructed her profession by systematically breaking down law enforcement graft rings. Her recent matter had led to the detention of 17 cops from a whole precinct for shakedown plots almost matching the one Mitchell had just openly conceded. But what was most intriguing was that Vanessa wasn't solitary in this quest. Her spouse, Area Head James Thompson, led the ethics unit, the exact division tasked with probing dishonest cops. James had devoted the past 3 years following a shakedown trend in the area without pinpointing the particular offenders. When Vanessa returned home that dawn with crisp captures of Mitchell admitting his offenses, she not only possessed sufficient proof to ruin a dishonest cop, she held the means to break apart a scheme far grander than she'd envisioned. "Darling, you won't credit the present I just acquired," she stated, linking her mobile to the audio setup. Mitchell's timbre resounded through the space, outlining his coercion methods with the accuracy of a graphed guide. James Thompson paused perusing the files and gazed at his wife with a look blending astonishment and respect. In 15 years in law enforcement, he'd seldom encountered such evident and self-damning proof. How many additional cops were involved? James inquired, already internally assessing the judicial ramifications. No fewer than 6. And they all chortled. They all concurred. They all recognized the plots. Vanessa grinned with the contentment of one who just snared a predator using merely a tiny lure. Mitchell is unaware yet, but last evening he didn't merely squeeze a lawyer. He admitted offenses to the spouse of the guy who's going to probe him. The pair recognized they possessed a unique chance ahead to ruin not merely one dishonest cop, but to employ his own admissions to locate and break apart a whole illicit ring inside the ranks. Mitchell persisted in his pattern, utterly unaware that his each action was being observed by a pair that merged deep understanding of the judicial framework with exclusive entry to the force's inner probe tools. The inquiry lingering was straightforward. Would a guy conceited enough to openly boast about his offenses be clever enough to detect the snare being meticulously built around him by two individuals who'd committed their professions to pursuing hunters exactly like him? The response would arrive far quicker than Mitchell could have foreseen, and in a manner that would convert his conceit into complete hopelessness. A week had elapsed since that exchange at Diner's Corner, and Mitchell persisted in his shakedown pattern without realizing that his each action was being carefully noted. Vanessa had converted her original shame into energy for a spy mission that would have envied the FBI. James Thompson wasn't merely any assistant. In his 15 years in the ethics section, he'd built a web of links extending from area lawmen to national lawyers. When Vanessa displayed the captures of Mitchell, James instantly identified the trend. This wasn't a lone dishonest officer, but component of a far bigger plot. "Darling, I must display you something," James stated, laying out a collection of files he'd secretly assembled on the dining surface. In the recent 6 months, there's been a 340% rise in accusations of shakedown versus cops in this area. They all adhere to the identical trend. Ladies solo, luxury vehicles, always nocturnal. Vanessa examined the papers with the precise accuracy of a seasoned lawyer. Each instance described scenarios almost matching her own encounter. Standard halts that swiftly evolved into coercion masked as penalties or intimidation of detention. And here's the fascinating bit. James proceeded, indicating a duty roster. All these events happened during Mitchell's duties or those of the cops who were with him at the eatery that dawn. It was precisely the type of organized proof Vanessa required. As a lawyer expert in offenses versus the state, she understood that solitary instances were readily disputed, but noted trends were almost undeniable in tribunal. As the pair schemed their approach, Mitchell committed the most foolish error of his profession. Emboldened by the triumph of his latest shakedowns, he'd started flaunting openly on digital platforms, uploading images of costly meals and opulent trips that his cop pay could never support. Another getaway in Miami, Mitchell posted on Instagram, uploading an image beside a leased Ferrari. Diligence rewards. #GoodCopLife #I'd serve my triumph. What Mitchell was unaware of was that Vanessa had made a phony account and was monitoring each upload, each remark, each open show of unexplained riches. To a seasoned lawyer, those uploads were captured admissions of unlawful gains. But Vanessa's cleverest action was to enlist Special Operative Rebecca Torres, a national probe expert who'd collaborated with her on prior law enforcement graft matters. Rebecca was renowned for her nearly otherworldly skill to penetrate and collect proof. "Vanessa, are you certain you wish to pursue this?" Rebecca queried during an apparently relaxed midday meal at a bistro near the Judicial Building. Challenging law enforcement graft always carries dangers, even when you're on the correct side of regulations. "Rebecca, he didn't merely squeeze me. He openly admitted that he performs this routinely with other ladies, Vanessa responded, subtly pushing a duplicate of the captures across the surface. How many additional sufferers do you believe exist? How many ladies have compensated for degradations they shouldn't have endured? Rebecca heard the captures via earpieces, her expression stiffening with each of Mitchell's admissions. As a national operative expert in graft offenses, she'd listened to numerous admissions during her profession, but seldom anything so self-damning and thorough. This isn't merely personal graft, Rebecca whispered, taking off her earpieces. This is structured illicit activity. I'm going to require national approval for a complete probe. Meanwhile, James had silently started examining years of stored files, finding that Mitchell's shakedown trend was even more ancient and more organized than they'd pictured. Employing his power as an assistant, he'd sought telephone reviews, GPS monitoring of squad vehicles, and examination of duty rosters that would disclose precisely where and when Mitchell executed his extra pursuits. Most remarkable was that Mitchell stayed utterly ignorant of the web tightening around him. In truth, his conceit had expanded so greatly that he started enlisting other cops into his plot, providing advice on how to spot profitable marks. The secret is selecting ladies who possess something at stake, Mitchell clarified to a novice officer over another brew at Diner's Corner, ignorant that one of the patrons 3 booths behind was Rebecca Torres, capturing his each syllable via national monitoring gear. Attorneys, physicians, managers, folks who'd prefer to compensate than encounter issues. The sarcasm was exquisite. Here stood a guy instructing others to perpetrate offenses against precisely the sort of individuals who possessed the ability to ruin him utterly. It was akin to observing someone excavate their own tomb while distributing tools to their companions. Vanessa understood she possessed in her grasp not only proof to ruin Mitchell, but to break apart an illicit activity that had probably harmed scores of ladies over the years. Each capture, each paper, each digital platform upload was another fragment of a mystery that grew more damning daily. James had found via his internal links that Mitchell was being evaluated for advancement based on his superior output figures, basically being compensated for his illicit pursuits masked as law enforcement productivity. It's ideal, Vanessa remarked when James informed her about the upcoming advancement. Let's permit him to obtain the advancement initially. The collapse will be even more dramatic when it occurs openly before all his bosses. Rebecca had secured national approval for a complete probe mission, including intercepts, digital monitoring, and penetration. The matter had captured the notice of the National Equity Bureau itself, which was keen on employing Vanessa's proof as a vanguard for a far bigger probe into organized law enforcement graft in the area. The inquiry lingering was intriguing. Was it feasible that a guy conceited enough to openly record his own illegality, enlist accomplices, and boast about shakedown on digital media was clever enough to realize that he was being pursued by a national lawyer, an ethics investigator, and an FBI special operative working in flawless synchronization to ruin not only his profession, but the whole illicit web he'd formed around him? The response would arrive far quicker than Mitchell could have foreseen and in a manner that would convert his conceit into total horror when he ultimately learned who the lady he'd selected as his sufferer on that doomed evening in the lot truly was. Mitchell's advancement event was planned for Friday dawn in the primary hall of the precinct. 50 cops, scores of relatives, and even certain area lawmakers were there to observe what would be the acknowledgement of an outstanding cop for his years of committed duty to the society. Mitchell fixed his fresh neckwear, purchased with shakedown funds, and grinned at the gathering. At 42, he would at last be elevated to captain, a role that would grant him even greater authority to broaden his illicit pursuits. What he was unaware of was that this event had been meticulously arranged by Vanessa as the ideal platform for his open collapse. Ladies and gentlemen, declared Precinct Leader Morrison, today, we celebrate a guy whose outstanding efforts on the roads exemplifies the finest of our unit. Vanessa sat in the third line, donning shades and a wrap, sufficient camouflage that Mitchell didn't identify her right away. Beside her, James Thompson feigned being merely an assistant welcome to the event. In the forward line, Rebecca Torres posed as an area reporter with a phony lens and media credential. As Mitchell ascended the platform to accept his fresh insignia, his mobile buzzed with a message. He subtly checked the display and his assured grin wavered for a split second. The note was from an unidentified sender. Recall the lady in the BMW? She recalls you. Mitchell attempted to keep his poise as Leader Morrison proceeded with his commendation address, but his gazes started to anxiously survey the crowd. Who had dispatched that note? And how did somebody know about the BMW? A second note came. Inspect your inbox now. With mildly shaking fingers, Mitchell subtly accessed his private inbox on his mobile. What he viewed chilled his veins. There was a zipped directory attached titled Proof Organized Shakedown Mission. Within were scores of sound and footage files and papers that carefully outlined every offense he'd perpetrated over the past 3 years. Captures of his exchanges at Diner's Corner admitting to Shakedown. Images of his digital platform uploads showing unexplained riches. GPS files from squad vehicles displaying odd motion trends, sufferer accounts, financial reviews disclosing unexplained inflows. The third note was the most crushing. In 5 minutes, all this will be sent concurrently to the FBI, ethics, the area media, and uploaded on all digital platforms. Unless you possess a highly inventive justification for thousands in recorded shakedown. Mitchell sensed icy perspiration dripping down his brow as Leader Morrison proceeded. An exemplar of honesty and commitment that ought to motivate us all. The sarcasm was ominous. There he stood being openly commended for honesty while clutching in his grasp undeniable proof of his own organized illegality. That's when Mitchell spotted Vanessa gradually taking off her shades and staring straight at him. The identification was immediate and crushing. The lady from the BMW, the sufferer he'd arbitrarily picked to squeeze, sat there observing his advancement event with a grin that blended fairness and payback. The fourth note arrived precisely as Leader Morrison summoned him to the speaker. Rebecca Torres, FBI Special Operative. James Thompson, Ethics Assistant. Vanessa Thompson, National Lawyer. You selected the wrong kin to squeeze Mitchell. At that instant, Mitchell completely grasped the scale of his error. He hadn't merely assaulted an blameless lady. He'd proclaimed conflict on a national lawyer expert in law enforcement graft, wedded to the leader tasked with probing dishonest cops with straight entry to the FBI. Sergeant Mitchell, please approach the speaker for your gratitude remarks, declared Leader Morrison, utterly ignorant of the theater unfolding. Mitchell advanced to the speaker with unsteady limbs, his expression clearly ashen. 50 individuals observed him anticipatingly, awaiting his motivating remarks about duty and safeguarding the society. That's when the fifth note came. You possess 2 choices. Admit openly now and bargain a lessened penalty or await 5 minutes for all to be disclosed in the most degrading manner feasible. This is your sole opportunity to retain some honor. Mitchell gazed at the crowd, then at Vanessa, who now grinned freely. He understood he was utterly vanquished. There was no getaway, no feasible rejection, no method to persuade anyone that the proof was fabricated. Mitchell commenced, his timbre stumbling into the speaker. I have perpetrated grave offenses against blameless residents. The hall became utterly quiet. Leader Morrison gazed at Mitchell with increasing bewilderment. For the past 3 years, I have utilized my insignia to squeeze funds from blameless ladies. I fabricated violations, issued false intimidations of detention, and coerced individuals for private monetary benefit. The astonished whispers of the crowd expanded swiftly. Mitchell's relatives gazed in dread. Colleague cops swapped disbelieving stares. Vanessa arose serenely and advanced to the front of the hall. My title is Vanessa Thompson, National Lawyer Expert in Offenses Against State Operations. I possess recorded proof that Sergeant Mitchell has organizedly squeezed scores of ladies over the recent few years. The explosive had detonated. Mobile lenses started capturing. Rebecca Torres, disclosing her actual identity, started to formally note the open admission. James Thompson ascended the platform. Sergeant Mitchell, you are detained for shakedown, graft, misuse of power, and illicit alliance. You possess the right to stay mute. As the restraints were fastened on his arms, Mitchell gazed at Vanessa one final time. She gazed back at him with a tranquil honor of one who'd converted personal shame into organized fairness. "You selected the incorrect sufferer that evening," Vanessa stated audibly enough for the whole crowd to hear. "And now, scores of other ladies you harmed will at last obtain fairness." The event that was meant to commemorate Mitchell's advancement became the platform for his dramatic collapse. An open detention. Within moments, footage of the admission were spreading rapidly on digital platforms. Within 60 minutes, Mitchell's shakedown activity would be top story on area broadcasts. The inquiry lingering was intriguing. Could a guy conceited enough to admit his offenses openly during his own advancement event have foreseen that his collapse would be employed as a model to overhaul the whole framework of law enforcement graft in the area, converting his personal shame into the spark for a transformation of openness and responsibility that would rescue scores of upcoming sufferers? The response would arrive in the weeks forward when the genuine scope of Vanessa's fairness would disclose itself to be far larger than mere payback against a single dishonest cop. 3 months following Mitchell's dramatic detention, the precinct appeared like an entirely altered location. The footage of his open admission had accumulated over 2 million watches, rendering it one of the most noted instances of law enforcement graft in U.S. records. But the genuine transformation occurred out of sight, carefully arranged by Vanessa and James Thompson. The mission that started with a basic $500 shakedown had evolved into the biggest law enforcement graft probe in the district's records. Rebecca Torres, now elevated to special overseer of the FBI, organized a national work group that had pinpointed and convicted 17 extra dishonest cops using proof collected from the Mitchell matter. The trend was organized, Rebecca clarified during a media gathering that Vanessa observed with silent contentment. "What we found was a structured shakedown group that harmed more than 200 ladies over the past 5 years, producing roughly $500,000 in unlawful profits." Mitchell, now fulfilling a 15-year penalty for shakedown, graft, and illicit alliance, had become an unintended star among prisoners. Sarcastically, the guy who flaunted about coercing vulnerable ladies was now continually degraded by other prisoners who recognized his tale from the bulletins. His previous associate, Manuel, who had collaborated completely with officials in trade for a lessened penalty, now labored as a teacher in law enforcement recovery initiatives. His personal collapse had evolved into a chance for salvation, instructing young cops about the perils of organized graft. But Vanessa's most refined payback was not merely the jailing of the dishonest. It was the total overhaul of the framework that had permitted them to flourish for so long. As a national lawyer, she had employed the records from the Mitchell matter to enact the Thompson procedure, a oversight and review framework that would transform law enforcement openness throughout the province. James Thompson had been elevated to area leader of ethics, now supervising the enactment of required body recorders, capturing of all cop halts, and a nameless complaint framework that permitted sufferers to complain graft without dread of revenge. "Every cop interaction is now captured and reviewed," James clarified during instruction sessions that became a countrywide example. "Any departure from procedure activates an instant probe. What occurred to Mitchell can never recur in our area." The most exquisite sarcasm was that Mitchell had unwittingly formed a heritage of openness and responsibility that would rescue thousands of upcoming sufferers. His recorded conceit and foolishness had become instructional content in law academies nationwide, a lasting model of how graft ruins not only the sufferers, but the offenders themselves. Vanessa had obtained the countrywide honor for superiority in justice enforcement for her efforts on the matter. But the genuine fulfillment came when she started getting correspondence from ladies who had been harmed by Mitchell and other dishonest cops. Each account affirmed that her personal encounter had evolved into an organized transformation. Lawyer Thompson penned one of the sufferers. "For years, I bore the shame of that day quietly. Witnessing Mitchell openly admit his offenses granted me the bravery to reconstruct my existence and believe the equity framework again." Most remarkable was that Vanessa had converted a distressing encounter into a personal campaign that surpassed personal payback. She had formed the Law Enforcement Graft Sufferer Aid Foundation funded with properties seized from convicted dishonest cops, providing gratis judicial aid to those who couldn't manage to challenge the framework. Rebecca Torres frequently pondered on how a solitary evening in a grocery store lot had sparked alterations that would impact millions of individuals. Vanessa didn't merely ruin the dishonest, she remarked during dialogues. She utterly restructured the framework to shield upcoming sufferers. 2 years following his detention, Mitchell tried to contest his penalty, asserting that his open admission had been forced. The contest was rejected in under 24 hours, with a magistrate remarking that we have seldom witnessed such plentiful and self-damning proof of organized culpability. During a standard trip to the penitentiary to record the advancement of her probe, Vanessa met Mitchell in the corridor. He attempted to avert his gaze, but she confronted him with the identical tranquil honor she had that evening in the lot. "Do you still recall the lady in the BMW?" she queried serenely as wardens observed them. Mitchell assented hesitantly, his conceit utterly vanished. "Good, because now you grasp that selecting the incorrect sufferer isn't merely risky for you, it's ruinous for the whole dishonest framework you embodied." The effect of the matter had extended far past area boundaries. Judicial institutions incorporated Thompson against Mitchell in their programs as a model of how carefully gathered proof and clever judicial tactic can topple apparently unbeatable plots of organized graft. Vanessa and James have become desired lecturers at countrywide meetings on law enforcement overhaul, sharing not only the judicial methods used to break apart the graft web, but also the significance of personal persistence when the framework disappoints its own sufferers. "The finest payback is not to ruin those who have injured you," Vanessa ended in her talks. "It is to construct a framework so sturdy and open that individuals like them can never again succeed through the graft of others." The heritage of the matter persisted to expand. The Thompson procedure had been enacted in 34 provinces. The frequency of law enforcement graft complaints had risen by 300% due to sufferer safeguard frameworks, and public belief in the law enforcement had started to slowly restore through openness overhauls. Mitchell, who had once flaunted that nobody would trust a black lady over a cop, had unwittingly demonstrated the precise contrary. His own recorded conceit became the undeniable proof that led not only to his own collapse, but to the formation of a framework where upcoming sufferers would possess a say, safeguard, and above all, fairness. Vanessa Thompson's tale demonstrated that occasionally the incorrect individual at the incorrect moment can be precisely the correct individual to alter everything. Her distressing encounter had evolved into a quiet transformation that would shield thousands of individuals she would never individually recognize. The genuine lesson of this tale? Mitchell attempted to degrade a black lady for some money, but wound up unwittingly forming a whole framework devoted to shielding individuals exactly like her. The finest payback was not merely ruining a dishonest officer. It was guaranteeing that his type would never again succeed in the obscurity of exemption. If this tale of fairness and overhaul has motivated you, join the feed for more actual existence instances of individuals who converted unfairness into transformation.